The hall goes silent the moment my name is called, and no one steps forward. I stand alone under the tall crystal lights of the conquered hall, my black robes pooling around my feet like a shadow that refuses to move. Around me, every single delegate from every single world has already found a partner. The Grelkin trade minister is laughing with a Voidwalker envoy. The Syzaxi hive cluster hums in quiet joy beside a Merrick diplomat. Even the silent armored core warriors, who trust almost no one, have found someone willing to stand beside them. And I am still standing here. My name is Nixara Velkarnath. I am the queen of the Thessari hive court, ruler of a species older than most stars in this sector, feared across a dozen systems for what we are and what we can do. My people do not feed on blood the way old human legends describe. We feed on feeling, on connection, on the warmth that passes between two living minds when they trust each other completely. It is a gift and a hunger at the same time, and tonight, in this bright and crowded hall, I feel that hunger more sharply than I have felt it in centuries. No one will partner with the Vampire Queen. I hear the whispers before I see the faces that make them. They think I cannot hear from this distance, but my hearing has never needed distance to work. She only wants your feelings, not your friendship. Look at her eyes. She is not hiding what she is. I heard her own court fears her more than outsiders do. I keep my back straight. My people did not survive this long by folding under words. But there is a difference between surviving and living, and tonight, standing in a hall built to celebrate connection between different worlds, I feel every inch of that difference. The ceremony master, a small nervous Grelkin official named Ren Ashcombe, glances at me twice from across the hall and then quickly looks away, as if my gaze alone might burn him. I do not blame him. My court taught me long ago that fear is easier for others than honesty. I was chosen queen not because I wanted power, but because my bond sense was the strongest ever measured among my people. I can feel loneliness radiating from another being before they even admit it to themselves. I can feel joy blooming in a chest before a smile ever reaches a face. It is why my people made me their ruler. It is also why, for 300 years, no one has ever offered me their heart. They are afraid that if they let me close, I will take too much. They do not understand that I would never take anything that was not given freely. That is the law of my kind, older than any crown I wear. But laws mean nothing against fear, and fear is the language every species seems to share. I watch the human delegation gather near the far wall of the hall, their voices bright and easy, their faces lit with the strange comfort humans always seem to find in each other, even in unfamiliar rooms. I have read reports about humans before arriving here. Stubborn, loud, reckless with kindness in ways that make no strategic sense. A young species, barely out of its own solar system, already causing more diplomatic headaches than empires 10 times its age. I have no interest in humans tonight. I have no interest in anyone tonight. I only want this ceremony to end so I can return to my chambers and let my court believe, once again, that their queen does not feel the weight of being unwanted. But then a voice cuts through the noise behind me, calm and steady, aimed directly at me. You're the only one still standing alone. I turn, expecting pity in the face that speaks those words. Pity is the one thing I cannot stand, because pity from another confirms the very thing I fear about myself, that I am something to be handled carefully, rather than someone to be known. Instead, I find a young human male watching me with open curiosity, not fear, not disgust, not the careful politeness the others use like armor. His uniform marks him as logistics staff, low rank, likely assigned here as an afterthought rather than a true delegate. His hair is dark and slightly messy, like he ran a hand through it without thinking. His eyes hold none of the careful distance everyone else in this hall has learned to keep from me. I am aware, I say, my voice colder than I intend. You do not need to point it out. I wasn't trying to embarrass you, he says, and there is no flinch in his voice, no retreat. I was just wondering why nobody's talking to you. You're the only one in this whole room who looks like she actually understands what tonight is supposed to be about. I study him carefully, searching for the trick, the hidden agenda, the dare from friends standing somewhere out of sight. Humans are known for reckless bets among themselves, but I feel nothing dishonest radiating from him. That alone is strange enough to hold my attention. And what is tonight supposed to be about, I ask, in your human opinion? Connection, he says simply. Not the kind you put on a treaty, the kind that actually means something. For a moment, I forget to answer. No one at this ceremony has said that word to me all night, not once, though it hangs over every conversation in the room like unspoken music. Everyone has performed connection, no one has spoken its truth. You are either very brave, I say, or very foolish, human. Probably both, he says, and for the first time all evening, something unclenches slightly behind my ribs. I'm Ethan Cole, logistics coordination, which basically means I make sure nobody's luggage gets lost between star systems. A humble profession for someone who dares approach a queen no one else will speak to. Somebody should, he says, seemed wrong that they weren't. I do not know what to do with sincerity. My court gives me respect, built from fear. Ambassadors give me careful courtesy, built from caution. No one has ever simply decided that ignoring me was wrong and then walked over to fix it. Behind Ethan, I catch sight of my own court advisor, a sharp-eyed Thessari elder named Vos Caliph, watching this exchange with narrowed eyes. I know what he is thinking. A queen should not be seen speaking with someone so far beneath her station, someone so temporary in the grand structure of galactic politics. But I find, standing here, that I do not care what Vos thinks tonight. You should be careful, Ethan Cole, I say quietly. My kind is not simple company. What we are is not something your species has faced before. I did some reading, he says, and there is a small challenge in his voice now, gentle but firm. Your people feed on feeling, not blood. You can sense loneliness, joy, fear, before anyone says a word. That doesn't sound dangerous to me. That sounds lonely. The word lands harder than any weapon could. I have ruled my hive court for 3 centuries. I have negotiated treaties that ended wars. I have stood in rooms filled with beings who wanted my kind erased from the galaxy entirely, and I have never once let my composure crack in front of an enemy. But this stranger, this small, ordinary human logistics officer, with tired eyes and an honest voice, has said in one sentence what none of my own advisors have ever dared to acknowledge. You presume a great deal, I say, though my voice has lost its earlier edge. Maybe, Ethan says, but I don't think I'm wrong. Across the hall, the ceremony master clears his throat, announcing that the evening's pairing rituals are complete, and that all remaining delegates without a partner should proceed to the registry desk for individual scheduling. It is a polite, bureaucratic way of saying that I have officially, publicly, been left without anyone. I feel the familiar weight settle over my shoulders, the same weight I have carried since the first Concord gathering I ever attended, decades ago, when the whispers first started and never really stopped. But then Ethan Cole does something no one in 3 centuries has done. He offers me his arm. I know I'm not exactly the diplomatic pairing anyone expected, he says, but if you're willing, I'd like to walk you out of this hall, so you're not the only one standing here when everyone else has already gone. I stare at his offered arm for a long moment, searching, always searching, for the catch, the joke, the hidden cruelty dressed as kindness. My court has taught me that kindness without motive does not exist among the older species, that everyone wants something, that trust is a currency spent only in careful, calculated amounts. But I feel nothing calculated in him. I feel only quiet, stubborn honesty, wrapped around a nervous energy he is trying hard to hide. You do understand, I say slowly, that accepting this small gesture from you may draw attention neither of us wants. I've never been great at avoiding attention, Ethan says, and the corner of his mouth lifts into something that is almost, but not quite, a smile. Something in me, something old and guarded and tired of standing alone in rooms built for connection, decides that tonight, just this once, I do not want to walk away from an honest hand. I place my fingers lightly on his arm. The hall does not fall silent this time, not the way it did when my name was called and no one answered. Instead, I feel dozens of eyes turned toward us, feel the ripple of whispered questions spread through the crowd like wind through tall grass. My own advisor, Voss, stiffens visibly near the far wall, and I know without needing my senses that tonight's small, quiet choice will echo through my court by morning. I do not care. For the first time in longer than I wish to admit, I do not feel like the vampire queen no one wanted. I feel like someone worth walking beside. As we move toward the tall doors of the Concord Hall, Ethan glances sideways at me, curiosity still bright in his eyes, though something gentler has joined it now, something careful and warm. "So," he says, his voice quiet enough that only I can hear it, "does this mean I get to ask you 100 questions nobody else has ever bothered asking, or is that against Vampire Queen protocol?" Despite everything, despite 3 centuries of careful distance and guarded silence, I feel the corner of my own mouth curve upward. "Ask carefully, human," I say. "You may not like everything you learn." "I'll take my chances," he says, and beneath the bright lights of a hall meant to celebrate connections between worlds, I begin, for the very first time, to believe that maybe I will not have to spend this ceremony, or perhaps even the nights that follow it, standing entirely alone. The corridor outside the Concord Hall is quieter than the ballroom we just left, but I can still feel Voss watching us from the shadow of the doorway, his disapproval pressing against my senses like a cold draft. I choose to ignore it. Ethan walks beside me at an easy pace, hands in his pockets now that my fingers have left his arm, glancing at the tall glass windows that look out over the docking bays where 100 different ships from 100 different worlds sit gleaming under starlight. "So," he says, breaking the silence first, the way he seems to do with everything, "how does it actually work? The feeding thing. I don't want to ask something rude, but I'd rather ask you directly than guess wrong from some report." I glance at him sideways, surprised again by his directness. Most beings who learn what my kind truly needs either recoil quietly or grow far too curious, in ways that feel like they are asking permission to fear me properly. "It is not blood," I say. "That is the old myth your species carried across the stars before you ever met us. We feed on emotional energy, the kind that passes between 2 minds who trust each other. Joy, comfort, warmth shared honestly. It nourishes us the way food nourishes you. So when you sense loneliness or sadness from someone, does that affect you too?" "It affects me more than you might imagine," I admit, surprising myself with how easily the words come. Loneliness in others feels like standing beside an empty fire. I feel the shape of the warmth that should be there, and I feel its absence just as clearly. "That sounds exhausting," Ethan says quietly, feeling everyone's emptiness all the time. "It is why my people are called a hive court," I explain. "We are meant to share our feeding among many bonds, never taking too much from one person alone. It keeps the balance safe for the ones we care for, and safe for us." "And you've never had that? A bond like that?" The question lands softer than I expect, without judgment, without the practiced diplomacy I hear from ambassadors twice his age. I consider deflecting, the way I have deflected this exact question for 3 centuries whenever it surfaces in careful court conversations. Instead, I tell him the truth. "No," I say, "not once. My own kind fears the strength of my bond sense too much to offer it freely. They believe a queen as powerful as I am would take more than she means to, simply because she could. So instead, they keep their distance and call it respect." Ethan is quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening slightly, though not with fear, with something closer to frustration on my behalf. "That's not fair," he says finally. "You didn't choose to be born stronger than everyone else. That shouldn't mean you're punished for it." I stop walking. He notices a step later and turns back toward me, concern flickering across his face. "You say that so easily," I tell him, my voice quieter than I intend, as though fairness is something you expect the universe to provide. "I don't expect it," Ethan says. I just think it's worth saying out loud when I see it missing. Maybe that doesn't fix anything, but it felt wrong to just let it sit there unspoken, same as it felt wrong watching you stand alone in that hall. There is something in the plain honesty of his answer that unsettles me more deeply than any political maneuver I have faced in centuries of rule. I have been lied to by kings, flattered by diplomats seeking favor, feared by soldiers who wanted my power on their side of a battlefield. I have never simply been told, without agenda, that something happening to me was wrong. We continue walking, slower now, until we reach a wide observation deck overlooking the star field beyond the station. Ethan leans against the railing, looking out at the distant lights, and I find myself standing beside him rather than several careful steps away, the way court protocol usually demands. "Can I ask you something else?" he says after a moment. "You have already asked several things," I reply, though there is no real edge in my voice now. One more will not break tradition. Do you actually want a bond like that? The kind your people are too afraid to offer you? The question hits somewhere deep and old, a place I have kept sealed since long before I ever wore this crown. I could deflect. I could remind him that queens do not need such things, that duty alone sustains a ruler of my station. It is the answer I have given myself for 300 years. But something about the quiet honesty of this observation deck, the soft hum of the station around us, the steady presence of a stranger who has not once flinched from what I am, loosens the careful wall I usually keep in place. "Yes," I say quietly. "More than I have ever admitted to anyone, including myself." Ethan turns to look at me fully now, and I feel none of the careful calculation I am used to sensing from those who study me. I feel only warmth, plain and unguarded, radiating from him like sunlight through thin cloud. "Then I think whoever's too scared to offer that to you is missing out on someone worth knowing," he says simply. I do not know how to answer him, so for a long moment, I simply do not. The following days pass differently than any I have known at a Concord gathering. Where once I would retreat to my quarters between sessions, avoiding the careful glances of other delegates, I find myself instead in the company of a human logistics officer who seems entirely unbothered by protocol, rank, or the careful distances everyone else maintains around me. He brings me small things, at first, testing the boundaries of what might be welcome, a cup of dark tea from the human delegation's private stores, offered simply because he thought I might like the warmth of it, even if I did not need the nutrition. A data slate filled with old human stories about creatures who feed on more than blood, stories he found himself curious whether I recognized any truth in. "Your stories get some things wrong," I tell him one evening, scrolling through an ancient tale about a count who lived in a cold stone castle and feared sunlight above all things. "We do not fear light, we fear being forgotten more than anything else." "That's actually kind of beautiful," Ethan says, watching me with quiet interest rather than surprise. Terrifying old myths, and the real fear underneath all of it is just wanting to be remembered. "You find beauty in strange places, human." "Maybe," he says, "but I don't think it's that strange. Everybody wants to matter to someone. Your people just feel it stronger and admit it less." I find myself, more and more, seeking out these small moments between official sessions, moments where the crown and the court fall away, and I am simply Nixara, speaking honestly with someone who listens, without fear clouding every word he offers back. It is not only Ethan who notices the shift. Voss approaches me on the third evening, his expression carefully neutral in the way court elders learn to master, though I can feel the disapproval radiating beneath it clearly enough. "Your Majesty," he says, using my formal title the way he only does when he intends to correct me, "the other delegates are beginning to whisper about your continued association with the human logistics officer." "Let them whisper," I say, without looking up from the report I am reviewing. Whispers have followed me since the day I was crowned. I have grown rather used to their sound. "This is different," Voss presses. "A queen entertaining private company with a being so far beneath her station reflects poorly on the entire hive court. Our standing among the older species depends on maintaining certain appearances. And my standing as a person, I reply, finally meeting his gaze. Depends on more than appearances alone, Voss. Something you and the rest of my court have apparently forgotten in 3 centuries of careful distance. He falls silent at that, though I feel his disapproval linger long after he leaves my chambers. That night, unable to settle into rest, I find myself walking the quiet corridors of the station until I reach the same observation deck where Ethan and I first spoke honestly. To my surprise, he is already there, leaning against the railing, staring out at the same distant stars. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asks without turning. It seems we share that particular affliction. He glances at me, something gentler than curiosity in his expression now. "Your advisor gave you a hard time about me, didn't he? You noticed?" "Kind of hard not to." He looks at me like I stole something valuable every time we're in the same room. I move to stand beside him at the railing, closer than protocol allows, closer than I have stood beside anyone in longer than I wish to calculate. He believes I am risking my position by allowing this friendship to continue. "Are you?" Ethan asks, and there is real concern in his voice now. Not for himself, I realize, but for me. "Perhaps," I admit, but I find, standing here, that I no longer care as much as I once did about the risk. Ethan is quiet for a long moment, watching the stars, before he speaks again, his voice softer than before. "Can I tell you something that might sound strange? You have already told me several strange things, Ethan Cole. One more will not overwhelm me. I don't feel sorry for you," he says. "Not the way I think your advisor probably assumes I do. I don't see someone who needs saving from loneliness. I see someone who's spent 300 years being careful with everyone else's fear, and I just think you deserve to stop being careful for once, at least with someone who isn't afraid of you." The words settle into me slowly, like warmth spreading through cold stone. I have been offered protection, alliance, respect, and fear in equal measure throughout my long rule. I have never once been offered simple, uncomplicated acceptance, freely given, without expectation of anything in return. "You are a strange creature, human," I say quietly, though there is no distance left in my voice now, only something far warmer. "So I've been told," Ethan says, and when he smiles this time, it reaches all the way to his eyes. Standing there under the quiet light of distant stars, further from my throne and closer to something I do not yet have a name for, I begin to understand that whatever risk Voss fears, whatever consequence my court worries might follow, I am no longer certain I would trade this quiet, honest moment for the safety of remaining exactly as alone as I have always been. The Concord gathering stretches into its 2nd week, and with each passing day, the quiet friendship between Ethan and myself grows into something neither of us names aloud, though I feel its shape clearly enough whenever he is near. He begins learning fragments of the old Thessari court language, stumbling over the soft, layered vowels my people use when speaking of feeling rather than fact. It is not a simple tongue. Most outsiders never bother attempting it, content instead with translation devices that flatten every word into something efficient but hollow. "You are pronouncing that entirely wrong," I tell him one afternoon as he attempts to greet me using the formal opening phrase reserved for close companions rather than strangers. "I know," he says, undiscouraged. "I looked it up on the station archive last night. Figured if I'm going to keep bothering you, I should at least try to do it properly." You did not need to learn anything. A translator would have sufficed. Translators don't really tell you anything about a person, Ethan says, adjusting his attempt at the phrase until the tone finally lands correctly, drawing a small, surprised huff of approval from me. "I wanted to understand something real about where you come from, not just get the words right." It is a small gesture, learning a language not his own, simply to speak with me more honestly, but it settles into me deeply, the way small honest gestures always seem to with him. My own court has ruled beside me for centuries without ever bothering to learn the softer dialects reserved for close bonds, believing formal court speech sufficient for all purposes. Ethan learns 3 new phrases before the week is finished. He also begins defending me, quietly but firmly, whenever other delegates grow careless with their words in his presence. During one particularly tense session in the Concord's shared dining hall, a sharp-tongued Marek ambassador named Doran Vesk makes a pointed comment about my kind's history, implying that Thesari queens have always used feeding bonds as tools of manipulation rather than genuine connection. "That's not what I've seen," Ethan says, before I can respond myself, his voice calm but firm enough to draw attention across the table. "Everything I've learned about her people is about balance and consent, not manipulation. Maybe get your facts straight before repeating old rumors." Doran blinks, clearly unused to a low-ranking human logistics officer challenging a senior ambassador so directly. "You speak boldly for someone so far beneath diplomatic rank, young man." "Maybe," Ethan replies, unbothered, "but somebody should speak up when misinformation gets repeated like fact, regardless of rank." The table falls quiet for a moment, and I feel something warm and unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Something that has nothing to do with feeding and everything to do with simply being defended by someone who expects nothing in return for the effort. Later that evening, as we walk together toward the observation deck that has quietly become our favorite place to speak honestly, I ask him why he chose to challenge Doran so directly. "Because he was wrong," Ethan says simply. "And because I've watched people talk about you like you're some kind of threat all week, when really, you're just about the most careful, considerate person I've met at this entire gathering." "You are speaking recklessly again." "Probably," he agrees, smiling slightly. "But I meant every word." I find myself, in these quiet moments, wanting to share more of myself with him than I have shared with anyone in centuries, including the deeper truths of what my kind truly are, truths even my own court rarely speaks of openly outside formal ceremony. "There is something about my people," I tell him one evening as we sit together on the observation deck, the station's artificial night cycle dimming the lights around us into something soft and private, that even our allies rarely understand fully. "I'd like to hear it if you're willing to share," Ethan says, settling in beside me with the same patient attention he gives every part of our conversations. "My kind can form what is called the Velthara," I explain slowly. "A soul bond deeper than any feeding connection we normally maintain. It links two beings together permanently, sharing not only feeling, but a portion of one another's very essence. It cannot be undone once formed." "That sounds like a serious commitment," Ethan says carefully. "It is the most serious bond my people are capable of forming," I confirm, "and it requires something my kind rarely offers freely, especially not to someone as powerful as a reigning queen. It requires mutual, unforced desire from both parties, freely given, without pressure or fear shaping the choice. So it's not something you can force, even if you wanted to." "No," I say, "and even if I could, I never would. The Velthara built on anything less than honest desire becomes something twisted, something that causes suffering rather than connection. My people learned that lesson centuries ago through mistakes I do not wish to repeat by describing them in detail." Ethan is quiet for a long moment, considering my words carefully rather than rushing to respond, another small habit of his that I have come to appreciate deeply. "Has anyone ever offered you that?" he asks finally. "The Velthara, I mean. Genuinely, without fear shaping their choice." "No," I admit, the word feeling heavier than it should. "Not once, in 300 years of rule. My own court fears my strength too deeply to risk such permanent closeness with me. They believe that a bond so deep with someone as powerful as I am carries too much risk, too much potential for imbalance, should my control ever falter. Do you believe that about yourself?" Ethan asks gently. The question catches me off guard, the way his questions often do, cutting past the careful diplomatic language I am used to navigating and landing directly on the truth beneath it. "I do not know," I admit quietly. "I have spent so long being told that my strength makes closeness dangerous. I am not certain I have ever truly examined whether I believe it myself, or simply accepted it because everyone around me insisted it was true. For what it's worth," Ethan says, his voice soft but steady, Everything I've seen from you these past 2 weeks tells me the opposite. You've been careful with everyone's feelings this entire gathering, including people who were rude to you first. That doesn't sound like someone who loses control easily. That sounds like someone who's spent her whole life making sure she never does, even when it costs her the closeness everyone else takes for granted. I turned to look at him fully, searching his face for any trace of the careful calculation I have learned to expect from those who study my kind closely. I find none, only steady, patient honesty, offered freely, exactly the way it has been offered every single time he has spoken to me since that first night in the Concord Hall. You see me very clearly, Ethan Cole, I say quietly, more clearly than most of my own court has bothered to look in 3 centuries. Maybe they stopped looking a long time ago, he says. Doesn't mean the rest of us have to make the same mistake. We sit together in comfortable silence after that, the distant stars stretching endlessly beyond the station's viewport, and I feel something shift quietly inside myself, something I have kept carefully guarded since long before I ever wore this crown. Over the following days, our friendship continues to deepen in small, meaningful ways. Ethan begins bringing me warm meals in the evenings, having learned from the station's cultural archive that while my kind does not require food the way humans do, the simple ritual of sharing a meal together carries meaning across most known species, myself included. I know you don't actually need this, he says, setting down a simple dish of steamed vegetables and grain one evening, but I figured sharing dinner might mean something similar to what feeding bonds mean for your people. A different kind of connection maybe, but still a connection. I taste the offered food carefully, more moved by the gesture than by any flavor it might carry. You did not need to learn this either. I wanted to, Ethan says simply, the same answer he has given every time I have questioned his effort on my behalf. I like learning things about you, all of it, not just the parts that are easy. It is during one of these quiet shared evenings that Grace Bennett, a young human ensign assigned to the Concord's Cultural Exchange Office, finds us together on the observation deck, her expression careful but not unkind. I don't mean to interrupt, she says, glancing between us with obvious curiosity, but people are starting to talk, Ethan, about you spending so much time with the Thessari Queen. Some of the other delegates aren't exactly thrilled about it. Let them talk, Ethan says, echoing almost exactly the words I offered Voss days earlier. Grace hesitates, glancing at me directly for the first time since arriving. For what it's worth, Your Majesty, I don't think there's anything wrong with what you two have. I just wanted you both to know what's being said, so it doesn't catch you off guard later. Thank you for the warning, Ensign Bennett, I say, genuinely appreciating the honesty, rather than resenting the interruption. Forewarned counsel is rarely wasted. After Grace leaves, Ethan turns to me, something more serious settling into his expression than I have seen from him before. Does it bother you, people talking about us like this? It bothered me greatly, once, I admit. Whispers followed me long before you arrived, Ethan Cole, and I have carried their weight for centuries. But I find, sitting here with you now, that their weight feels lighter than it once did. Why is that, do you think? I consider the question carefully before answering, wanting to give him something honest rather than something simply comforting. Because for the first time in longer than I can properly measure, I say slowly, I no longer feel as though I am carrying that weight entirely alone. Ethan reaches over, hesitating only slightly, before resting his hand gently near mine, on the railing between us, not quite touching, offering the choice rather than assuming it. I close the small distance myself. His hand is warm beneath mine, warmer than I expected, carrying none of the careful distance my own court maintains whenever duty requires them near me. I feel, faintly, the honest warmth of his feeling reaching toward me, unguarded and freely offered, the way feeding bonds are meant to feel when built on trust rather than fear. I do not feed from him, not yet. It is too soon, and the choice must remain entirely his to offer, not mine to take, however gently. But I allow myself, for the first time in 3 centuries, to simply feel the warmth of another being, choosing closeness with me freely, without calculation, without fear clouding the gesture. "Thank you," I say quietly, "for not looking away." "I don't think I could, even if I tried," Ethan says, and beneath the quiet hum of the station and the endless stretch of distant stars, I begin to understand that whatever risks still wait ahead of us, whatever consequence my court or his own delegation might eventually threaten, I am no longer willing to face them by retreating back into the careful, guarded distance I have called safety for far too long. The summons arrives on the morning of the Concorde's final formal session, delivered by a stiff-faced Thessari courier who bows so low his forehead nearly touches the floor of my chambers. "Your Majesty," he says, voice tight with unease, "the court elders request your presence in the private conference chamber. They say the matter is urgent." I already know, before I even rise from my seat, that this urgent matter concerns Ethan. I find Voss waiting for me outside the conference chamber, flanked by 3 other senior court elders, their expressions carefully neutral in the way my people have mastered over centuries of political maneuvering. I feel the tension radiating from all of them before a single word is spoken. "Your Majesty," Voss begins, once the chamber doors seal behind us, "we must speak plainly regarding your continued closeness with the human logistics officer." "Then speak plainly," I say, seating myself at the head of the table without waiting for permission. "I have little patience remaining for careful diplomatic phrasing this morning, Voss. Delegates from 3 separate systems have approached us privately," he continues, undeterred by my tone. "They express concern that a queen of your station, engaging so openly with someone so far beneath diplomatic rank, reflects poorly on the entire hive court's standing among the older species." "And what precisely do they suggest I do instead?" I ask, though I already suspect the answer. "End the association," says Elder Mirith, a stern woman who has served my court since before my coronation. "Quietly, without further scandal. Return your attention to matters befitting your position, before this becomes something more difficult to contain." I feel something cold settle over me, though not from fear, from recognition. This is the same argument my court has used for 3 centuries to justify keeping me carefully isolated, dressed now in slightly different words. "You call it scandal," I say slowly, "yet you have never once called 300 years of my solitude a scandal, though it has cost this court far more than any friendship with an honest human logistics officer ever could." The chamber falls silent. "Your Majesty," Voss says carefully, "we only wish to protect your standing and the standing of your people. You wish to protect the same careful distance that has kept me isolated since the day I was crowned," I reply, my voice hardening now. "I have kept my hunger in balance for 3 centuries, exactly as this court demanded of me, sacrificing every genuine connection offered to me, out of fear that my strength made closeness too dangerous to risk. I will not sacrifice the first honest connection I have found in that entire span, simply because it makes certain delegates uncomfortable at a diplomatic gathering." Elder Mirith's expression tightens. "Then perhaps we must consider whether a queen, unwilling to prioritize her court's standing, remains fit to lead it." The threat, though carefully wrapped in formal language, lands exactly as intended. I rise from my seat slowly, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "You may consider whatever you wish, Elder Mirith, but understand this clearly. I did not ask to be born with the strongest bond sense our people have measured in generations. I did not ask for the isolation that came with it. And I will not spend what remains of my long life continuing to accept that isolation simply because it makes the rest of you more comfortable." I leave the chamber without waiting for their response, my heart's pounding harder than they have in decades, though whether from anger or fear, I cannot entirely say. The confrontation, however, is not finished. That evening, during the Concorde's closing banquet, Ambassador Doran Vesk approaches our table with a satisfied expression that immediately puts me on guard. Ethan notices it too, straightening slightly beside me. "Your Majesty," Doran says, his tone dripping with false courtesy, "I wonder if your human companion understands fully what he has been entertaining these past 2 weeks." "Choose your next words carefully, Ambassador," I warn, feeling the familiar cold settle over my composure. "Oh, I intend to," Doran continues, ignoring my warning entirely. He turns toward Ethan, his smile sharpening. "Did she mention the Velthara bond to you, young man? The permanent soul link her kind can form. Did she mention that once formed it cannot be undone, regardless of whether the human partner later regrets the choice?" "She told me exactly that," Ethan says evenly, though I feel tension rising in him now. "Did she mention," Doran presses, clearly enjoying himself, "that Thessari history includes examples of that same bond used to control rather than connect? That queens before her have used their strength to bind partners against their true will, disguising control as consent?" The accusation lands like a physical blow, old history twisted deliberately to frighten rather than inform. "That is not who I am," I say sharply, "and you know that history far better than to twist it so carelessly, Ambassador." "Perhaps," Doran says, unbothered by my anger, "but perhaps your human friend deserves to hear the full truth before he finds himself bound to something he cannot escape." Around us, other delegates have begun to notice the confrontation, drawn by Doran's raised voice and clearly intentional public display. I feel dozens of eyes turning toward our table, feel the whispers already beginning to spread through the banquet hall like fire through dry grass. This is exactly what Doran intended, a public spectacle, designed to frighten Ethan into retreat and humiliate me before the entire gathering in the process. I turn to Ethan, bracing myself for the fear I expect to find in his expression, the careful retreat I have seen from every other being who ever learned too much about what my kind is truly capable of. Instead, I find something entirely different. "Is that supposed to scare me off?" Ethan says, addressing Doran directly now, his voice steady despite the growing audience around us. "Because bringing up old mistakes some queen made centuries ago doesn't tell me anything about who she actually is now. I've spent 2 weeks with her, Ambassador. I've watched her defend people who were rude to her first. I've watched her hold back her own hunger out of respect for others, over and over, even when nobody else in this entire gathering bothered to notice or care. That doesn't sound like someone using control disguised as consent to me." "You are young and inexperienced with her kind," Doran says, though his confidence has begun to falter slightly under Ethan's steady response. "You do not understand the danger you are inviting." "Maybe I don't understand everything yet," Ethan admits, "but I understand enough to know that judging someone entirely by mistakes other people made generations before she was even born isn't fair, and I understand enough to know that I trust her a whole lot more than I trust you right now." The banquet hall falls into stunned silence. I feel something rising in my chest that I have not felt in longer than I can properly measure, something warm and fierce and entirely unfamiliar, not simply gratitude, something closer to hope. Doran, clearly unprepared for such a direct and public rejection of his intended humiliation, straightens his robe stiffly. "You are making a grave mistake, young man." "Maybe," Ethan says, echoing his own frequent answer once more, "but it's my mistake to make, and I'd rather make it choosing trust than living my whole life choosing fear instead." Doran retreats without further response, disappearing quickly into the crowd of watching delegates, though I can feel the weight of dozens of curious, uncertain gazes still lingering on us both. Voss approaches moments later, his expression unreadable. "That display will only fuel further talk among the delegates, Your Majesty." "Then let them talk," I say, echoing Ethan's own steady words, feeling their strength settle into my own voice for the first time. "I have spent 3 centuries allowing fear to dictate the shape of my life, Voss. I find, standing here tonight, that I am no longer willing to continue that pattern, simply to preserve appearances." I turn to Ethan, searching his face carefully. "You did not need to defend me so publicly. The consequences of Doran's accusations will follow you now as well." "I know," Ethan says simply, "but some things are worth the consequences. You're one of them." I feel something break open gently inside my chest, some old wall I have maintained since long before my coronation, worn down not by force, but by patient, steady honesty offered freely and without hesitation, exactly as it has been offered every single day since that first night in the conquered hall. "You continue to surprise me, Ethan Cole," I say quietly. "Good," he says, the corner of his mouth lifting into something warm, despite the tension still lingering around us. I'd hate to become predictable. Later that night, standing together once more on our familiar observation deck, I find myself turning the events of the evening over carefully in my mind, searching for the fear I expect to feel after such a public confrontation, the fear that has always followed me after moments of exposed vulnerability. I find, instead, something closer to clarity. Doran meant to frighten you away, I say, watching the distant stars rather than meeting Ethan's eyes directly. He meant to remind you what I am capable of, and hope the reminder alone would be enough to end this before it became something more permanent. "I noticed," Ethan says. "Didn't work, though." "Why not?" I ask, finally turning to face him fully. "You have every reason to be cautious, Ethan. What he said about the Velthara bond, about my people's history, none of it was entirely false, however cruelly he chose to present it." Ethan considers the question seriously before answering, exactly as he considers every question I have ever asked him. "Because I don't think you're the mistakes other queens made before you," he says finally. "I think you're someone who spent her whole life trying not to repeat them, even when it cost you everything else you might have had instead. That's not something to be afraid of, Nixara. That's something worth respecting." It is the first time he has used my true name instead of my title, and something in the quiet warmth of it settles deep into my chest, warmer than any feeding bond I have ever known. "Say it again," I ask quietly. "Nixara," he repeats, softer this time, like something precious rather than simply a name. Standing there together beneath the endless stretch of distant stars, having weathered both my own court's disapproval and a rival's deliberate cruelty in the same single day, I begin to understand, more clearly than I have ever allowed myself to before, exactly what I am willing to risk for the chance at something real. Everything, I realize. I am willing to risk everything. The morning after the banquet, I wake to find a formal request waiting in my chambers, delivered not by courier this time, but by Ethan himself, standing nervously at my door with a data slate held tightly in both hands. "I did some reading," he says, before I can even greet him properly, "about the Velthara, the real history, not the version Doran tried to use against you last night. I wanted to understand it properly before I said anything." "And what did you learn?" I ask carefully, stepping aside to let him enter. "That it's not about control," he says, setting the data slate down and meeting my eyes directly. "It's about choice, real choice, offered freely by both people involved, without anyone forcing anything. The bad examples Doran mentioned, they all happened because someone ignored that part, because someone took the choice away instead of offering it honestly." "That is correct," I confirm, my heart's beginning to beat faster than they should. Ethan takes a slow breath, and I feel, for the first time since we met, genuine nervousness radiating from him, warm and honest and entirely unguarded. "I want to offer you that choice," he says, "the real one, not because Doran tried to scare me off, and not because your court disapproves, because these past 2 weeks have been the most honest, most real connection I've ever had with anyone, and I don't want to walk away from that just because it's complicated." My breath catches, an old, careful reflex rising instantly to caution me, to remind me of every reason this could go wrong, every fear my own court has spent 3 centuries instilling in me about the danger of my own strength. I set that reflex aside. "You understand," I say slowly, needing to be certain before allowing myself to hope, that once formed, the Velthara cannot be undone, that it will link us together permanently, sharing not only feeling, but a portion of what we each are, for as long as we both live. "I understand," Ethan says steadily. "You understand that my court will not easily accept this, that Doran and others like him will use it as further proof that the Sari queens cannot be trusted with such bonds, regardless of how freely it was offered." "I understand that too," he says, "and I don't care. I've spent my whole life doing the safe thing, the expected thing, and somehow I still ended up standing alone in rooms just like you were, before I decided that wasn't the life I wanted anymore. I'd rather choose something real and difficult than something safe and empty." I search his face carefully, searching for even the smallest trace of doubt, of pressure, of anything less than complete and freely given desire. I find none. Only steady, patient honesty, the same honesty he has offered me every single day since that first night in the Concord Hall. "Then I accept," I say quietly, my voice trembling slightly with an emotion I have not allowed myself to feel in longer than I can measure. "Freely, and without hesitation, Ethan Cole." The bonding ceremony, when it finally comes 3 days later, is unlike any Velthera joining my court has witnessed in generations, not because of grand ceremony or elaborate ritual, but because of its stark simplicity. No previous Thessari queen has ever requested this bond from someone outside our own species, and certainly none has ever had the bond requested of them so openly, by someone with nothing to gain from court politics and everything to lose by defying them. We gather in a small private chamber, rather than the grand ceremonial hall my court initially insisted upon. I refuse the elaborate ritual robes traditionally required, choosing instead simple attire that feels more honest to what this moment actually means. Voss stands present as required witness, his expression still carefully guarded, though I notice something softer beneath his caution now, something that might, given enough time, grow into acceptance. Ethan stands across from me, his own simple attire matching the quiet honesty of the moment, his hands steady despite the nervousness I can feel radiating gently from him. "Are you certain?" I ask him one final time, as tradition requires before any Velthara bonding begins. "More certain than I've been about anything in my life," Ethan answers, without hesitation. I reach for his hands, feeling the familiar warmth of his presence settle over my senses, the same warmth I first felt on that quiet observation deck weeks ago, though it burns brighter now, closer to the surface than it has ever been before. "Then let us begin," I say softly. The Velthara bonding is not a violent process, nor a frightening one, despite the old myths and careless rumors that surround it. It is, instead, an act of complete and mutual openness, two minds choosing to meet each other entirely, without walls, without careful distance, without the guarded caution either of us has carried through every relationship before this moment. I feel Ethan's warmth flow into me first, gentle and steady, carrying with it every honest feeling he has offered me since the night we met. His curiosity, his stubborn kindness, his quiet refusal to look away from what I am, even when everyone else in that first grand hall chose fear instead of understanding. In turn, I offer him everything I have carefully guarded for 3 centuries. My loneliness, worn thin and heavy from decades of careful isolation, my fear of my own strength, instilled so deeply by my own court that I nearly believed it as truth rather than the careful manipulation it always was. And beneath all of it, something I have never allowed even myself to fully acknowledge until this exact moment, the simple, aching hope that someone, somewhere, might one day choose me freely, without fear shaping their choice. The bond settles between us slowly, like warm light spreading through cold stone, until I can feel him not simply beside me, but woven gently into the very fabric of what I am, exactly as I am now woven into him. When it finishes, I find tears gathering in Ethan's eyes, though his expression carries nothing but quiet wonder rather than distress. "I can feel you," he says softly, his voice filled with something close to awe. "Not just what you're feeling right now. All of it, everything you've carried for so long." "And I can feel you," I answer, my own voice unsteady with emotion I have not allowed myself to fully express in longer than I can properly recall. "Your kindness, your stubbornness, the quiet courage it took to walk toward someone everyone else was too afraid to approach." Voss, standing silently at the edge of the chamber throughout the entire ceremony, finally steps forward, his expression carrying something I have never seen from him before in 3 centuries of service. "Your Majesty," he says slowly, "I have witnessed many bondings in my long service to this court. I have never witnessed one so freely, so honestly given." "Does that change your opinion, Voss?" I ask, unable to keep a small, careful challenge from my voice. He is quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously rather than offering the careful diplomatic answer I half expect from him. "Perhaps," he admits finally, "perhaps I have spent too long believing that protecting you meant keeping you distant from the very connections you needed most. Watching this tonight, I begin to wonder if our fear did more harm to you than any bond ever could have. It is not a full apology, not yet, but it is more honesty than my own court has offered me in longer than I can remember, and I find myself grateful for even this small, careful beginning towards something better." News of the bonding spreads quickly through the remaining delegates still present at the Concord gathering, and not all of it arrives as harshly as Doran's earlier accusations suggested it might. Several delegates from smaller systems, species who have long admired the Thessari's careful discipline without ever daring to approach one of our queens personally, express quiet curiosity rather than fear, drawn by the openness of a bond formed without secrecy or manipulation. Doran himself avoids us entirely for the remainder of the gathering, though I feel no satisfaction in his continued absence, only a quiet relief that his careless cruelty did not succeed in frightening away the first genuine connection I have found in 3 centuries of rule. On the final evening of the Concord gathering, Ethan and I return once more to the observation deck, where our friendship first deepened into something real, standing together now not simply as queen and companion, but as something neither of our species has a perfect word for, something built not on old fear or careful distance, but on patient, mutual choice. "Do you regret it?" I ask him quietly, watching the distant stars stretch endlessly beyond the station's viewport. "Any part of it?" "Not for a second," Ethan answers, his hand finding mine easily now, the bond between us settling into something warm and comfortable rather than overwhelming. "I told you before, some things are worth the consequences. This is one of them. Even knowing it cannot be undone, even knowing my court may never fully accept what we have chosen. Especially knowing that," Ethan says, turning to face me fully, "because it means we chose this honestly, with everything at stake, instead of choosing something safe and empty just because it was easier. I feel the warmth of the bond between us settle deeper, and beneath it, something I have not felt in 300 years of careful isolation. Not simply connection, though that alone would have been enough. Something closer to belonging. I spent so long believing I was unfeedable," I say softly. "Too dangerous, too strange, too much for anyone to risk closeness with. My own court taught me to believe that fear was simply the price of my strength." "They were wrong," Ethan says simply. "Yes," I agree, feeling the truth of it settle fully into me for what feels like the very first time. They were wrong. Standing there together, bonded not through fear or duty or careful political calculation, but through patient, freely chosen honesty, I understand finally what every whispered rumor and careful distance from my own court never allowed me to believe about myself. I was never truly unfeedable. I was simply waiting, through 3 long centuries of careful isolation, for someone brave enough to reach past every old fear surrounding what I am, and choose instead to see who I actually was underneath it. Ethan Cole, an ordinary human logistics officer with no diplomatic rank and nothing obvious to gain, walked toward me in a hall where everyone else chose fear, and in doing so gave me something no crown, no court, and no careful century of rule ever managed to provide. He gave me the simple, quiet certainty of being chosen, not out of pity, not out of political calculation, but freely, honestly, and completely, exactly the way every Velthara bond is meant to be given. As the Concord gathering draws to its close, and delegates from a dozen worlds begin preparing to return to their own systems, I find myself, for the first time in 3 centuries, looking forward rather than simply enduring what comes next. My court will need time to fully accept what has changed between us, and Ethan's own people will likely have questions of their own to navigate in the days ahead. But standing together on this quiet observation deck, bonded through choice rather than fear, I understand that whatever challenges still wait ahead of us, we will face them exactly as we faced everything before this moment. Together. And for a queen who spent 300 years believing herself too much for anyone to want, that simple, steady word carries more warmth than any crown I have ever worn.